fiction, does that mean that text has one unified story, one single story? You were given a few videos in class last week to go through, and the first of which would be The Danger of the Single Story by Chimamanda Adichie, which kind of problematized the idea that just because you come from a particular background, you have a particular story that unifies you with everybody from that same background. So for instance, if you are an African American young adult, female, your story is the story of every African American young adult female in that context. Would that be fair, a representation? Likewise, if we think about our own respective classmates here, you've got Malaysians, you've got Arabs, and you've got somebody from China. Would it be fair to say that someone from China has that one story that is shared by everybody in China, and somebody from the Kurds background has one single story that is shared by everybody? Would that be fair? Likewise, the Malaysian, we have one single story for all Malaysians. Obviously, I think just as you're hearing me say that, you will think that's absurd, right? But at the same time, when we are reading texts from other cultural background, we make that assumption, right? We make the assumption that, I've read a story about South African identity before, so I know what this text is going to be about. Or I have read an African American story before, so I know what this, The Hate You Gave by Angie Thomas, I know what this story will be about. So is that fair? So the assumption that we make just because you have read some other text around the same context, would we expect the same narrative? Would we expect that single story to appear in this new text that we're reading? I think that's what Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk challenges in terms of the single story, So that's an important issue that we need to bring in. And then you were also given a YouTube lecture on minority literature, which I think is very comprehensive. It describes minority literature as an entity, as a whole, collectively, and then it goes into the fundamentals, into the African American experiences, identifying key writers, into the people of color experiences and the issues and the themes that is coming out from that. So based on these videos, as well as the other two videos on identity politics and politics of race in the context of Britain and South Africa, based on these 4 videos, you have various issues that you can take away from. So for today's discussion, what I would like from you is to go straight into the text, right? So you've got 2 novels that you've been asked to digest, read, and do a comparative study. The one is Angie Thomas and her young adult fiction, and set in the African American context, 21st century. The other is a memoir written in it kind of breaks the genre of the memoir. Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. There are various kind of voices in that memoir. You see the font, the way it's written, and the way it's presented. It also challenges the element of the memoir writing, right? That is within the apartheid context when Trevor was growing up, right, as a young boy with a white father and an African Xhosa woman mother. And this mixed parentage was a crime in the context of apartheid at the time, right? So how does the reading of these 2 novels affect your conception of, be it minority fiction or identity race, identity politics, race politics? and this idea of the single narrative, or any other theme that you found relevant that we can problematize. So I want to kind of hear from you in terms of your thoughts, and then we will open up to the discussion, and then we will round up with final thoughts before we end the class. So who would like to go first?
I don't mind going
No?
first.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, my take on these two books that I think focus on, of course, racism and segregation would be, I think minorities are always deemed different, not enough from the majority, and the minorities is always synonymous with insufficient or, to a certain degree, like abjection. It is as if these opinions are fixed towards them. So in these two novels, some conversations, some thoughts or actions are not done publicly or openly or even loudly. Like, for example, Star she behaves differently, and automatically, in my opinion, it's like, she's like shut in certain, situations. Things are usually better left unsaid until she reaches some, boiling points. So here I think she's always in a process of, hesitation. Similarly with Trevor Noah, I think the appetite, or as you mentioned it as apartheid, segregate people within their own homeland. Even churches are separated according to racial demographic, right? So Noah somewhat was in search of, his sense of belonging ever since he was little. So these are two books that, kind of open as to stories from their sides, from the other. So it made me imagine stories that are not written or registered. So who's going to believe them, and what else should the minority do to gain trust, or better yet, to be at least at par with the majority? So stories or retelling of stories, I think, shape our imagination towards one subject, and it is the power of stories or retelling that informs us the differences we have from one another. So The Hate You Give, I think, very much reminds me of Chimamanda Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story, because there are big possibilities of stereotyping and incomplete stories being told. So I would say one story could present one assumption, and to me, that could be a start of something uncertain that leads to, shutting down other stories from places that have been othered. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you. And who would like to go next?
Can I go
We'll
next? Because
Fine.
what I'm about, or what I think about this story is related to Shah, since she mentioned about stereotyping. There's this quote from Adichie where she said the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make the one story become the only story. This really speaks to me because, again, like Shah said, the idea of stereotyping, especially in Halil's case, where the stereotype of the black man from Garden Heights is usually related to thug, drug dealer, gangbanger, and we can see how these stereotypes are used against Halil as if like he is responsible or accountable for his own death, for his own murder, as if like the reason it is okay for him to be killed, to be shot by the police just because he is labeled as a thug, drug dealer and gangbanger. And even if it's true that he sells the drug, I think that the other side of the story, which is his story, the reason why he is selling those drugs also needed to be heard because it was not his intention to sell those. So again, if we look at just in one story, the story from the media fed to the people who were watching the media, like in The Hate You Give, people will only know about the Halil represented in the media, and it's kind of saddens me that what happened in The Hate You Give actually happens in the real world too. like what's happening now, it's unchanged, where the ones being interviewed by the media is not the witness herself, it's not Star, but it's actually the inspector's father who is giving his take of the situation when he is not the witness, he isn't there. So here you can see how the media is trying to stir the story, like framing Halil for his own death. But so in the hate you give, the stereotypes I use against the people, but in Born a Crime, when Trevor was in jail, he actually uses the stereotype of the colored man to protect himself, where according to him, the colored man who was the colored people who were sent to jail were usually the most violent thug. So even though he is not, but he is using that stereotype people have on colored people to protect himself. So in that, I see like the difference between the two novels, where one, the stereotype is used against them, and the other one, the stereotype is used to protect themselves. So that's what I see in both novels.
Thank you. Great job. Next, sorry, Salim, did you put up your hand?
Yes, doctor.
Yes.
Okay, doctor, I do believe that. So, do you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah. Do you want to go next?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, doctor. I do believe that ignorance of minority is the main reason behind all the calamities and misfortunes happen in these countries. And ignorance ignorance of the authority and paying attention to these kind of people, poor people and people of slum areas, like what happened to many places in Africa and even in Iraq in my situation. So what happened to Khalil, I do believe that it was as a result of ignorance of authorities, and the authorities ignored these kind of people, and that's why they resorted to do illegal or and things which are against the law. The same case with Patricia and her the moving from Soweto to Johannesburg. From one place to another place, maybe looking for a better life and welfare and happiness. Maybe everybody need new life. Everybody want education. Everybody want all, for example, things which are very essential for the life. I do believe what happened to both of the characters was as a result of ignorance of authorities to these sectors of society. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
May I go next, please?
Yep.
If you guys don't mind. Yeah. I just remember what Aimee said, like the role of the media now is like the US media especially, like they tend to look into, like, instead of the victim's perspective, like for example the war in Iraq, they look at the perspective of the people who's the perpetrator. Also the hate you give, instead of like interviewing Star, getting Star's perspective, they interviewed the father of the police who shot Khalil instead, which is very weird, and the masses just eat it up. So I think the media, they don't necessarily tell you the truth. They kind of, they're biased in that way, and people just take their sides because that's what they see. But going back to what I was going to talk about in this echoing.
Yeah, I'm going to mute my mic.
That we are a product of our own environment. Because the black people, like they said from both novels, there was like a place called the Hood. The Hood is basically where all like the gangster thug black people live, and there it's not like a very progressive city. People do drugs and they commit crimes. Even in Trevor Noah's book, they say that there's always some form of crime. The minor one being like things like shoplifting, even him selling CDs illegally, because that's what they had to do to live. It's kind of like it's how they were brought up. But in Trevor's case, he was more, I think, because of his upbringing, because of his mother. His mother was like a strong woman who taught him like the rights and wrongs of the world. So he didn't grow up violent. But but that's like one of the major things that stood out to me. And there's also like internalized racism. It's because everyone keeps telling them that they're inferior to the white people, that they feel themselves that they are inferior during like the appetite. Even they segregate like the whites. There's only two kind of people you can be, the white or the black. For the colored people, it gets very confusing. It depends. Are you whiter or are you more black? That's how you segregate. Even the definition of what is white and what is black is kind of blurred and it's weird. But Trevor Noah's book is like, it's really really funny. I know like it has a very serious undertone. The story itself is serious, but the way he tells it, it's very funny. Especially like the scene when he like went to when he pooped on the floor and he put it at the bottom of his trash bag, and then it ended up becoming like an exorcising ritual in his house, which is very funny. But yeah, that's it for now. I think I'll let someone else go first. Go ahead.
I'll go next, Doctor.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So actually, I read The Hate You Give, I think last year, and then recently I read Born a Crime. And then comparing both of the books, I noticed in Born a Crime, the mother is actually the main character, not so much Trevor Noah. I think the influence of the mother is very, very huge. Okay, Fuzla just left. Oh, is Fuzla okay? All right. So what I noticed comparing both novels, I noticed that the parents in both novels, they are actually trying to educate their children about the world, albeit in different manners. So Patricia in Born a Crime, she's very tough. She's like, okay, so this is how the reality is. So you just must, you just muster up courage. So the mother doesn't hide that fact. So it does fulfill this unfortunate stereotype about black mothers being very tough, or actually non-white mothers. Every mothers of color always stereotyped as being this strict, tough tiger mothers. But then when you compare it with The Hate You Give, the mother's actually the gentlest, most soothing, understanding mother, who's very empathetic and is actually trying to shield Star from the stark reality. So the mother, compared to Patricia, because Patricia very directly said, I'm not going to leave the country. Africa, South Africa is my country, and we're staying here, despite knowing that Trevor will be at a disadvantage because of that. But for the mother in The Hate You Give, she sent her children to a predominantly white school, and then she has a brother who actually lives in a predominantly white neighborhood. So she actually wants to somewhat detach her children away from the surroundings that they were raised in. So I noticed that there is this commonality. Both of them, they want their children to aspire beyond the limitations. They want their children to be better, but the way to get there is different. So I think relating it to Chimamanda's lecture, so it does tell us, mothers and fathers, it doesn't matter what skin color you are, to be honest. They will do whatever they can for their children. So it does provide a lot of aspects, a variety of aspects about parenting that don't usually get discussed. So if you look at things that are viral on social media, again, relating it to the media aspect that my friends have mentioned, we always see this. I mean, I know people think it's funny, but we always see this caricatures of parents of color being made to be of a certain characteristics. Very rarely people would say Asian mothers are nice, or Asian mothers or African mothers do not beat their children, or Latina mothers, behave in a certain manner or in a certain manner. So I do feel like The Hate U Give and Born a Crime, it shows that parents, they actually they have different ways to cope with the discrimination that their children have to experience. So yeah, so that is my take on the book. Maybe because I am researching about mothers, but yeah, that is what I get lah.
Doctor, I think you're muted.
Sorry, Doctor, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Who did I? Fuzla's not here. Okay.
I think Fuzla just texted in group.
Yeah, I think I think she'll come back in a few minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, Ruby, I also noticed the presence of like family, albeit incomplete, right? Yeah, in both of the stories.
So let me just unpack. Let me just unpack some of the things. Hello. Salim, did you want to say something?
Doctor, just I would like to add a real example on what I said. I just remembered, Doctor, sorry.
Yes. Go ahead.
So Iraqi context consists of three types of population, let me say. Shia, Sunnah, and then Kurds. According to the context, we are Kurds. We are minority, because the higher number of people are Shia, then Sunnah, then Kurds. So, because of ignorance we have faced from the X regime at the time of Saddam Hussein, they consider as a minority. And let me give a real example. I was born in Mosul. Mosul is not a Kurdish city. Most of the population Arab, and they are Sunni. And at that time, it was impossible for me to buy a house, or even to register to join the military college, to be an officer, or to be something like that, even a police officer or an officer in the army. So at that time, we feel that we are ignored. As a result of that, many revolutions against the regime at that time happened because of ignorance, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Fuzla, would you like to go next? Hello?
I'm sorry, come again, Doctor?
Fuzla, would you like to go next? Hello? Sorry,
I can hear you.
Is Fuzla
Yeah,
in?
she's in.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Fuzla.
Okay. Sorry. I'm having internet connection right now. So.
It's okay. Okay.
Where were we? I'm so sorry. I'm like lost right now.
No. Your thoughts on the two novels. We haven't heard your thoughts yet.
Okay. So for the novel, The Hate U Give, and also Trevor Noah Born a Crime, what interests me in those two novels is the way both main characters are somewhat in a very ambiguous situation where they are in the minority, but they also have privileges in their life, which differs them from the other minority. And that's why I feel like their experience is very unique, because one day for Trevor, he he is mixed, right? He is not like all black or all white, because his father is white and his mother is black. So his mixed identity um kind of differs him from um um the other people in his community, even though he feels like he belongs in the black community more. And for Star, she also has privileges where she went to a white school. So Star also has friends who are white, and she has experiences of living among the white, and also in her own neighborhood. And that in both character, that kind of creates the dilemma in their identity, because at first, like Star, she doesn't feel belong in the white community, but she wants to be accepted there. But when she's in her own community, she doesn't want to be ostracized for um, talking like the whites and all that. And for Trevor, we can see that he has a lot of conflict with his identity in the book, which I enjoy reading because he's so funny. um, and I feel like one particular thing that really interests me is the way they use this language to their privilege. Where in Star, when she was interrogated, when she went to be the witness, when she was interrogated, she uses um, a, a more formal language to be seen for her to be seen as more legit in a way, because she feels like the officer would listen to her better if she uses the language that they uses. And I think Trevor also has the same kind of experience where he uses his advantage in languages to assimilate or to interact with people, and to actually gain trust from other people. And yeah, I think that privilege is very interesting and very prominent in both books. So that's all from me.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so we've heard from everyone, and I think we'll get from Alice when she joins us either today or next week, hopefully. She's having connection problems because she says the weather's really bad. It's very stormy where she's at in China right now. So okay, let's just kind of unpack some of the things that you said. And by the way, brilliant initial responses and impressions about these two novels. And I think your take on them is both unique, but it also shows convergence in the way all of you view these two novels. So Shah, you were talking about sense of difference. And did you say abjection?
Yeah, to a certain degree, like insufficient or objection, synonymous with that. Yes.
So when you say different, like for instance, Star, she is viewed as different. I mean, a follow-up question from me would be, by whom? Who views her as different? You just heard from Fuzla this idea of they are minority, yet they hold a position of privilege because of certain choices, be it they made or choices that they are, back to what Ruby was saying, based on what their parents made, the choices that their parents made, right? For instance, in Star's case, She doesn't attend school at her neighborhood, but her dad wanted her to attend a school at the white neighborhood because they have better curriculum, the schooling is better, teachers and all the rest of it. So that inadvertently causes her to be viewed as different. So, when we talk about minorities, they are viewed as different. In the case of Star, who views her as different? Do her family members, for instance, view her as different? Do the members in her immediate community where she lives view her as different? Do the members of the schools, her classmates, her teachers, do they view her as different? So we need to unpack that so that it doesn't become another single story. So this idea of minorities being viewed as different, even that we need to unpack. We need to problematize to show the heterogeneity of it rather than there is just one answer to this problem, So I want you to kind of like probe that further. And then you talked about Trevor and his sense of belonging, issues of sense of belonging. You said something about the stories by the other, that they are incomplete stories told, by whom?
The one that I have here is The Hate You Give very much reminds me of Chimamanda's video because there are big possibilities of stereotyping and incomplete stories being told, like Khalil. What else?
But by whom? Again, who gets to tell the story? I think this is another thing that, if you look at Pierre Machere's notion of silences or gaps, as a reader, when you're reading the text, even if the writer does not give you the answers overtly, that this is the person who's telling the story, you get to fill in the blanks and make certain suggestions. What is the writer telling me, but what is the writer also withholding from me? So who is the one getting to tell the story? So in Trevor's case, he gets to tell his story. He gets to tell his side of the story, right? But who gets silenced in that experience, in that storytelling that Trevor does? Whose story is not heard? That is something you may want to probe as well, In Star's case, whose story do we not get to hear in Angie Thomas's novel? Whose story do we hear and whose story do we not get to hear, right? So that's something to kind of probe in order for us to be able to say this issue of being different or this issue as viewed as being different can have many guises, many angles to it, right? So that we avoid falling into the trap of coming up with a single discourse to explain and justify the reading of minoritization in these two novels, right? So I just want you to kind of probe that a little bit more before you upload that in the e-task. Ken?
Okay, Doctor.
All right, Aimee. So Aimee, you picked up on stereotype. You picked up on this idea of the stereotype, especially with regards to media representation. And I particularly like what you said about how stereotypes are considered norm because of the kind of representation that is given by the media, by the popular culture, for instance. And yet the question is that the voice representing conflicts faced by the minorities do not come from the community themselves, as you rightly pointed out. And this idea that in order for individuals to really be represented, they need to have their voice and their stories narrated, right? But what happens to individuals whose stories are not narrated? For instance, Patricia. For instance, Khalil, their stories are not narrated, okay? So who does the narration for them? That's something else that we need to kind of challenge the storytellers. Has Trevor Noah done justice? Has he done justice to the story of his mother? has Angie Thomas done justice to the story of Khalil? So this is something else, because instead of just seeing the main story of the protagonist, we may want to also challenge the writers of these minority fiction. To what extent are minor characters given due in the narrative in order for us not to fall into the trap of the stereotype? Because Khalil ends, as a thug. His story ends as if he is a thug, but it doesn't. In the end, when Star goes along with the riot and makes certain speeches at the end and finally says her piece, she was a witness, right? She was there when he was shot. In her speaking up, indirectly, his story is also told, right? So sometimes these individuals don't get their stories told overtly, like Patricia. She doesn't, right? But Trevor tells her story in an indirect fashion. So that is something else we can probe, which is something the media, you're right, will not represent. And then you talked about this. I like this idea that you talked about how in Trevor's case, he uses stereotype for self-protection, for self-preservation, right? So sometimes stereotypes, this is like, this is the opposite of double consciousness, where in this idea of the double consciousness is you understand how you view yourself and you understand how the majority views you. But in using stereotype for his own benefit, Trevor has kind of reversed that. Knowing this is exactly how you see me, I'm going to challenge that, right? So Trevor's strength lies in his ability to maybe accept this is the way others see me, but use that acceptance and that stereotype to challenge certain fundamentals in the way society treats minorities. So I like that. So just tie it up a little bit more, Amy, and then you can just upload it on UKM Folio for e-task 4.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Salim, you're right. Obviously, ignorance is the root of conflicts with regards to minorities. And it is very much, in the realm of ignorance that you have racism, prejudicial biases, stereotypical depiction, right? And then you made the comparison between Khalil and Patricia, and how there is a kind of a correlation in their stories. But I'm just wondering if you want to challenge that discussion a little bit by asking a question between them, who has more agency, right? Patricia is in a context where having a relationship with somebody of another race, meaning a white man, she can be put in jail. She can be considered a criminal merely for having a relationship with somebody from another race, right? From the white race. Now, she doesn't just do that. She goes on to get married with the person, and she goes on to have a child with that person. So she challenges it to that level, to that extent. Khalil, on the other hand, is very much living within the norms or the expected norms of a young black man, and yet in the end he dies. So I want you to kind of challenge how the writers, Trevor Noah and Angie Thomas, challenges this idea of ignorance, and how that level of ignorance is not one story. Because yes, the African American youth, especially, they are being treated in a way that again depicts age-old stereotypes, racism, that goes back to slavery and post-slavery and Jim Crow and all the rest of that. And yet you see how Star's family challenges that, right? Challenges it by not trying to educate society about their identity and all that, but challenges it in another way. How does Patricia challenge that? Okay, so I agree with you. Ignorance is the cause of the conflicts faced by the minorities. But I also want you to kind of probe that discussion a little bit and ask yourself, how does Trevor Noah and Angie Thomas, the writers of these novels, how do the two writers appear to challenge that ignorance? In telling the stories, you know, how do they appear to challenge that even though ignorance is the root of conflicts faced by minorities in a majority context, their storytelling challenges it. If so, how? Which characters, in which context? So I want you to kind of just probe that a little bit more before you submit the e-task 4. All right?
Okay, Dr. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay. All right, Lisa. I like this. Again, I like the idea when you all pick up something unique, it just kind of tells me that you've read the story. You know, it's not just about you knowing the plot, right? It's about you've read the story. You really have digested the story. So Lisa, when you talked about this internalizing of racism and how sometimes when we internalize a stigma or a misrecognition that is imposed on us, you know, it could be as simple as, oh, you know, you're a female, you can't do that. Or you're somebody of color, you can't do that. You cannot aspire to be something that is beyond your sensibilities, your race, your gender, your environment, your background, your nationality. So when you internalize these expectations of others on you, be it racism, misogyny, any other kind of prejudicial attitudes and minoritization, when you internalize it, certain things happen. So I like that idea, and I would like you to kind of look at it from two perspectives. You may look at it from the older generation's perspective, i.e. Star's dad and Trevor's mom. How have they either internalized it or internalized it earlier and then challenged it? Because both Star's father and Trevor's mom didn't begin challenging it when they were young. They very much embodied, they internalized it. And it was because they internalized it and then later challenged it that they were then able to raise their child in a way that gave the child that helping hand. You know, think about your own individual context where your parents have gone through certain challenges, and it's because of that you are now able to stand on their shoulder and go further up, raise higher. You know, you're able to kind of rise above your station because your parents or even your grandparents and your parents have done that groundwork, right? So this idea, I like this idea of internalizing racism, and you know, look at this one context. Trevor's grandfather, I think Trevor's grandfather. There was one story when the policeman was on the horse, and they were in a riot situation, and Trevor's the policeman was like basically breaking the crowd and stuff. And Trevor's grandfather called on the policeman and cracked a joke, basically said something and just cracked a joke. And Trevor realized that at that moment, Trevor had a different sense of the dynamics. You know, when you can take back your power through jokes and humor and wit, and how the grandfather didn't cower, didn't give in to the demands of the white policeman on the horse. So, you know, look at those kinds of examples, how, yes, you're right. The theme of internalizing of racism is rampant, right? Throughout Even the grandmother internalizes racism in her own household with regards to Trevor. She wouldn't hit Trevor because she doesn't want Trevor to change colors, because he's a white boy, and if you hit him and he'll go blue, black, and all sorts of colors, and she might be put in jail because she just abused a white boy. In her mind, she is still seeing him as a white boy, not her grandson. So her other grandkids get a different treatment, he gets a different treatment. So she has also internalized that color superiority of the white, superiority of a particular race. So that is a kind of internalizing of racism. How about in The Hate You Give? How is racism or other kind of isms internalized? Or you may look at it as, how is it challenged? How is the internalizing of racism challenged by the two writers? Okay, so put it together before you submit for your e-task. Okay? All right, Ruby. So Ruby, you looked at the parental figure, primarily the mother figure. You looked at the influence of Trevor's mom and Star's mom, and kind of challenged this idea that women of color, especially moms from the community of women of color, tend to have this single narrative. You know, they are very much the tiger mom. For those of us who are tiger moms, sometimes you feel embarrassed because you are positioned in that category, but at the same time, you feel like you still have to do it. You have to be the tiger mom to ensure your children are taken care of. But yet, like you said, in The Hate You Give, the mother comes across as more gentle, right? But does she though? Does she appear gentle, or does she challenge the father in different ways? So I want you to kind of read. There are bits and pieces when you get the sense that even though the father plays the patriarch, because in Born a Crime, there isn't a patriarch. So the mother plays both the matriarch and the patriarch in the household, and the grandmother, of course. But the mother takes the father's role and the mother's role, right? Whereas in Star's case, which is unique, because another single story, another narrative of the African-American experience is the male figure, the father figure is always absent, right? He's either in gangs, or he's incarcerated, or he has been killed, right? So again, that is another single story narrative, or this idea of the you know, what Chimamanda Adichie talks about, this idea that the African American man has always been represented as missing in his children's upbringing, right? In his children's life. It's almost like he gives them his identity or his name, and then he leaves, right?
Trevor mentioned that also in his book, how for a lot, like, they're either getting killed or kidnapped. So I was actually surprised to see that commonality.
Yeah, but even in African American stories, this is also something pretty rampant, you know. So how does Angie Thomas challenge that? You know, she challenges it by not only allowing Star to have a prominent father figure, you know, her father. And the father actually gives her a particular name for her to aspire for. So, you know, there is that kind of challenging of stereotypes, challenging of the single story of the African-American man, and how the African-American men, especially fathers, are not holding their responsibilities together very well. Whereas in this case, in The Hate You Give, he is very much the decision maker. He is the one who makes the decision that they eventually will relocate. The entire family will relocate, right? Their business and everything else. So you may compare mother with mother, or you may compare parental figures in prominent parental figures in The Hate U Give and in Born a Crime, and then make those kinds of comparison, and then submit that on UK Folio for e-task 4.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Finally, Fuzla, this idea of, I really love the idea that, again, another dimension of challenging the single story of the minorities vis-a-vis the African American context, for instance, is this idea of the privilege. How within the minorities there are those who have certain privileges, be it privilege because of education. And as you have rightly said, the use of language to kind of pass as people of a particular background or class or education standard, right? And it's also used reverse. For instance, in rap songs and hip hop songs, they purposely break the grammar in expressing themselves not to show their lack of education, but to kind of reclaim language for themselves. But in this case, as you have rightly said, the use of language to associate with a particular group, particular class, so that when you speak, if you go back to a telephone conversation by Wole Soyinka, he's on the phone, he's talking, he's asking about the room, and he comes across very much like an Englishman. It is only when he finally admits, that he's actually African down on his passport, does the landlady kind of like asks, how dark? Are you very light or very dark? You remember? So this idea of language and the way you speak allows you to pass for a particular community or ethnicity. And likewise, you are right. Trevor uses language to tap and to kind of make himself be more closely associated with a particular community, right? He can speak many African languages, and that allows him to kind of be, he's like a chameleon. He's fluid. He can, when he gets into this environment, he changes his skin color to kind of suit them, metaphorically. And then when he's in this other environment, he changes it again. And that ability to move from one to another allows him that idea of, I may not belong anywhere, but I belong everywhere. So that's another privilege also, right? So I like that idea very much. I like the idea very much. So, and this idea, and I like this dilemma that you talked about, the sense of acceptance on the one hand, and the sense of being ostracized by the association with the majority on the other. So being accepted means you abide by the standards of your community, the way you speak, the way you dress, your choice of music that you like, the education, your place of residence, all the things that makes up a sense of community, right? But in Star's case, by attending a school away from her neighborhood, by being in an environment where she has a white boyfriend, so that already kind of changes the dynamics of race relations between her and her community, not necessarily her family, not filial relationship, but communal relationship for sure. Because how would they see her? Have you kind of given up on us? Have you relinquished your attachments and your loyalty to us by associating with the other? So she has to deal with that. She has to contend with that. And also, if she chooses them, in some instances like education and all that, if she chooses them instead of her community, she will be ostracized for it. So I like the word privilege, but I wonder if privilege is the right word, because privilege means, you get lots of perks, right? When you are in this position of privilege, you have lots of things coming your way. But does does Star appear to live the life of the privilege? Or does it leave her with more conflicts, with more internal conflicts? So I want you to probe with that a little bit. The same with Trevor. Does he come across as if, you know what, life is swell, you know, I'm living the life, I've got this privilege? Or are we seeing it as privilege because we're looking from the outside, right? Because we're not from that community, we're looking from the outside and we think, you know, they live the life of the privilege. They get to pass as maybe, you know, people of this background, and they get also the acceptance of their own community. But is that really the case? So I want you to kind of problematize it, probe it a little bit more, put it together, and then submit it for eTask 4. Okay? All right, any questions?
Okay,
Any questions? Okay, sorry. Yes. Any questions?
I just wondered the length of our analysis. Is it like a page thing, Doctor?
It could be a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, just whatever thoughts that you have right now, I want you to tighten the argument a little bit, just with a bit more clarity based on the suggestions that I have given, and then you can submit that. Because it's about 4 marks per eTask. So I'm not expecting, like, you know, an extensive work, but something that will leave you thinking when you recall these 2 novels, you have something of a strong statement to make, rather than just a superficial reading of it. I want you to kind of be able to make certain fundamental statements. So, you know, you can have it in a PowerPoint slides. You can do a write-up, an actual write-up, your choice. But think about, you know, it should be around 30 minutes worth of work, which I think you've done more of. So don't worry about it. Okay, just put something together in a concrete fashion and then submit it on UKM Folio by this weekend, so that you are done with the first 4 eTasks, right? You will have 1 more eTask after this. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Doctor. Thank you. For eTask 3, right? Because I haven't submitted it. Should I submit the slide that we present, or
No, because the slide is for assignment 2. The slides would be assignment 2. The eTask 3 would be based on our group discussion 2 weeks ago. Something like this that we had 2 weeks ago. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. The eTask is just 4 marks. So keep it compact, keep it digested. Whereas the seminar that you all did, that is part of assignment 2. Separate, put that in the separate category.
Okay, Doctor, thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Because I want you, if you compile the portfolio of work done this semester, you will see, you've got short answers for comparison of 2 texts, you've got video essays, you've got seminar slides, and finally, you have a full-blown journal paper. So that's the kind of the portfolio of work that you have produced for this course. And then if you choose to, maybe later, if you're having to teach a literature course, if you go on to teaching, you may want to look at some of the things that you have written as a kind of a point of departure to develop. Or you may want to work on any one of these texts later on. You may, again, look at the work that you have done here as a point of departure for you to kind of expand on your idea. So indirectly, for eTask, I'm expecting you to write a paragraph with a thesis statement. That's it. So a short paragraph, and it culminates with a thesis statement. Whereas your video essay, your seminar, and your journal paper, you are expanding the discussion beyond the abstract. So the e-task will be like an abstract, about 250 to 350 words, something like that, plus or minus, you know, but it culminates with a thesis statement. Okay, any questions?
Doctor, just confirming, so the slides are supposed to be uploaded for e-task too, right? Or am I getting it wrong? No.
Assignment 2, kejap, did I not upload?
So the e-task 2 are about the poems, the 3 comparative poems. That's
Yeah,
e-task.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's e-task 2. e-task 3 would be Sinan Antunes and
Yeah.
yeah.
For the assignment 2, Doctor, you mentioned we did not have to submit the slides. It was just the seminar presentation, assignment 2?
Yeah, if you want to submit, I've already marked you, I've already taken your marks for it. So if you want to submit, sorry, I think the reason of the confusion is because I have not sent assignment 2. Okay, I have not I didn't register in UKM Folio for assignment 2. I think that's why you're having this confusion. So I've done that now. Let me just share screen and show you. This is just you know, in case anything, at least we've got this one-stop center where can you see the screen?
Yes, I'm able to, Doctor.
So we have where's the e-task? We've got e-task 1. We have e-task 2, 3. We have e-task 4. And then you will have one more e-task for next week. And then you have assignment 1, which is the video essay. Then assignment 2, which is the seminar, which we've already gone through. But if you can just upload your slides here, that would be great. And then you will have your final project. Okay, so so for next week, let me just end here. Any questions, first of all, based on today's session?
But I just find the concept of minority literature very interesting. Of course, I think like Chimamanda mentioned, it is very important to tell a lot of perspectives, a lot of stories about a people. But I wonder, does that invalidate the novels that have been written by people who are not from the community? I always wonder about the legitimacy or the validation, because there are a lot. For example, you know, because I like to read materials written about the Middle East, but then most of them get written by obviously European journalists. Of course, they are written beautifully, and I think they do give justice. But I wonder, am I reading, you know, the voice of you know, the survivors or their voice? So that is something that I find very interesting. So are they considered minority literature if they are written by white journalists? Obviously not, right? So yes, so it is a conflict that I find a very interesting to explore.
I think that idea of allowing individual communities to have their own say about their own representation can also be further probed, because there isn't a one unified voice that describes the experiences of, for instance, any one particular minority community, right? And that is the kind of heterogeneity we do expect. And with comparative literature, we kind of have to come back to the discipline and our course. With comparative literature, this then becomes both the impact of our reading, but it can also cause certain limitations. So you're right. Say, for instance, you want to look into the representations of a particular ethnic community of a particular country. But if the writers who are writing about that particular community do not come from that particular community, will that representation be valid, right? So we had this discussion 2 weeks ago when we were looking at the representation of the Iraqi experience in the context of the war. And you see the representation by Kevin Powers, and you see the one-sided, muted representation of the Iraqis in except for a few characters, but the general population of the Iraqis were very much literally, muted and objectified, and also a part of the landscape, not subjects themselves, right? Then you have Sinan Antoon's representation. Does that mean that every Iraqi experience is as Sinan Antoon has represented it? Surely not, right? So I know I've been blessed to know a few Iraqi PhD students over the years, and I know every one of them, including Salim's experience, is unique. So you cannot assume that there is a one collective Iraqi experience just because we have read Sinan Antoon's The Corpse Washer. So The Corpse Washer is not the quintessential Iraqi novel, right? So we continuously will have to challenge and probe that as readers, but that's the significance of our reading, but that is the limitation also, which is I haven't read all representations of this particular ethnic minority. I'm only reading this one representation, and I can only make a case study of whatever it is that I'm saying, be it about ambiguous identity of the privileged minority, or the influence of the mother figure, or the internalization of racism, or the ignorance of the other, or the stereotyping of the single story, or the sense of abjection and the incomplete stories told by others of minorities. So every one of you allows this idea that the discussion opens up another avenue about minority representation, but it also signals that it isn't a single story that you can kind of conceptualize and say, I have read, and this is what African American text is about. This is what a South African text by a bicultural person is about. You cannot do that, right? I think that's the beauty of literature. And because we're doing comparative literature, the beauty is we can make this kind of comparison to find points of convergence and divergence that allows us to see the beauty of both texts in greater depth. Because if you just read The Hate U Give, you have a different take to it. Or if you just read Born a Crime, you have a different take to it. But because you're reading it side by side, you are now challenged to say, all right, now what's the connection between them? How are they the same? They're not bicultural stories. How are they the same? Right. That next week, you're going to read one more final novel on this bicultural identity. Then you get to kind of compare it with Born a Crime, right? Set in another context. Filipino mother and Kuwaiti Arab father. So compare that to a Swiss white father and a Sosa black mother in Trevor Noah. So you have this kind of divergence of reading because of the choice of text that you get to make. So I think back to what Ruby was saying, we cannot simplify this by coming up with a kind of a statement that unifies all literatures and say, this is what I have understood. Rather, we can say, based on the case study, based on the text that I have read, these are some of the thoughts that I'm making. So that's why the e-task is important. I'm asking you to challenge yourself to come up with a more concrete statement for the e-task so that you can say, based on the two novels, this is my statement. This is what I have concluded. And these other two novels, this is my statement. So the more practice you have in making those statements, the more you realize that I've a lot of things to say about these novels. But when they are used comparatively, I have to say something that allows them to be comparable. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, Doctor. Because there's this conversation about minority representation. I think this token representation as well. For example, the Disney movies, because they are trying to be inclusive, So I find that the debate never really ends. So if there is representation, people will say it's not representational enough. But in literature, there's also that argument as well. So that is why I'm
Good. No, I mean, I like the questions that you all are probing in reading these texts, and I think, like I said at the beginning of the session, you know, some of you are very much embodying a independent researcher mindset, moving from a graduate status to even postgraduate status. So keep doing this, keep looking at text and making these kinds of informed statements based on what you are reading in the text, as well as based on certain lens that you are bringing in as you're reading the text. If you keep doing it this way, it then becomes second nature. Even when you're reading for pleasure, you know, reading whatever escape literatures that you're reading, science fiction or what have you, you cannot help but look at the text and challenge the text and ask certain fundamental questions that you're doing now for our course and all your other literature courses. All right? Okay, so basically that's the end of today's class. I'm going to go around the class. If you all can get your cameras on, just for a bit. Let me know how you're progressing. Salim, how was the class today? Was that okay? Did you follow the discussion okay?
Yes, doctor. In fact, you know, you gave me some good ideas, and thank you very much for all my sisters and you at the top of them. In fact, you made me to change a lot, and add some new ideas to my e-task, and that's why, you know, I'm going, inshallah, to add good points to that. And concerning the bamboo stock, I have intention to make my project about that, about bamboo stock with Borna crime. So my question to you is, which one is closer to bamboo stock, Borna crime, or the first, the other knowledge, the hate you gave?
It depends on what you want to focus on. So as you've seen today's discussion and these last few weeks, when you make a choice of text, you are informed by the issue or the theme or even the lens that you are trying to problematize, right? So if you're looking at bicultural identity, or if you're looking at this kind of the inability to fit into any particular society because of, you know, culture or religion, you know, multicultural sense of identity, then the bamboo stock fits very well with Born a Crime, because in the context of the two characters, both characters are very much culturally hybrid, and in Jose's case, in Bamboo Stock, religiously also hybrid, whereas in Trevor Noah's case, he's not. He's very much a Christian, raised by a Christian mom, you know, a strong Christian household, right? But if you're looking at other aspects, maybe you want to look at the mother figure. Maybe you want to look at you want to compare the father figure. You know, Isa's father was not prominent. You know, he kind of let his mother dictate the way life was for him and his estranged son, right? He did not take a kind of responsibility for Isa's upbringing. So in that, indirectly, it's very much like Trevor's father, who kind of relinquished his responsibility. But in Star's case, the father played a strong role. So if you want to compare the father figure, then you might choose different texts. So I would say it all depends on your thesis statement. It all depends on what it is that you are trying to hypothesize in the reading of these. What is it that you hypothesize in the reading of these two texts, comparing it across time and space? Okay?
Yes, doctor. Just I would like to say that I'm completely with you, doctor. You are right, because it was, you know, my opinion to concentrate on the Bamboo Stock plus Born a Crime. with regard to identity crisis. I mean, the struggling of people of identity, and this is the issue of minority people, and we faced in Iraq as a Kurds with the same issue. That's why I'm going to connect the idea, the context of Iraq, and plus the two novels together, and make something good, inshallah ta'ala. Thank you so much.
But in Trevor's case, he's not just a minority. So you must look at this idea of being a minority within a minority, because he hasn't a particular communal identity attached to him. The same with Jose or Isa in the Bamboo Stalk. There isn't one singular community that embraces him as theirs. Right, so that is the hybrid sense of identity, the third space, the third cultural space sense of identity is something you may want to probe. And what does Trevor make of it, and what does Jose or Isa make of it? Right. In Trevor's case, he is born and raised in one place, whereas in Isa's case, he starts off in Kuwait and then goes to the Philippines. And then comes back. So there is that kind of, the movement itself causes a fracture in his sense of identity, right? So there isn't a kind of permanence in Isa's case. His identity fracture is caused largely because of many, many reasons. One is the lack of a prominent father figure. He's a boy, he needs a strong father figure, but the father figure kind of just relinquishes his responsibility. And the mother tries, but at the end of the day, it's still a kind of a mismatch for him, right? So you're right in terms of the crisis of identity, but it's a lot more complex. So I need you to kind of probe into that a little bit. But we can talk more. You can consult with me after next week's class, or you can do it earlier. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Any thoughts from today's class, any comments, or even something that you are working on right now? Lisa? Okay, we'll come back to Lisa in a minute. Fuzla.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay. I would to apologize first because I have missed like a chunk of the conversation because of my internet connection. So I think I'll watch back the recordings after this. But yeah, I think it was the two books that we've examined today. It was a good read. And I really like both books, and I feel like it gives a lot of new perspectives into the minority and the issues that they face. So yeah, that's all.
All right, thank you. Just a footnote, the African, the blacks in South Africa, they're not the minority, right? They are the majority, right? The whites are the ones who are the minority, and yet in the South African apartheid context, it was the minority who was leading and was dominant in the society, right? So I need you to kind of realize that, at least that one statement. I think that's super crucial. Okay, Aimee?
I like that you bring that up, Doctor, because I was about to mention that. I like how in one of the videos you gave that the definition of minority, before I watched the video, whenever I think about minority, I only think about just the numerical aspect of it. But when I watched the video, I realized, minority does not equivalent to having less number within the community. So when Trevor mentions how the African was actually the majority in Africa, but they were considered as the minority in terms of the power that they have over their country. So that's one very valuable knowledge that I learned from watching the videos and also reading these two novels. And I also, so far, I really enjoy the novels that you recommend us to read.
Brilliant.
Because before this, I only treat literature as a form of escapism. I only read literature, young fantasy genre, fun literature. But reading this literature, it's an eye-opener for me. It tells me that there are good literatures out there that does not only based on fantasy genre. So I'm really thankful for that, Doctor.
Great, great. Hopefully the final novel will also be to your liking, inshallah. Okay. Lisa, did you wanna say something? Because just now you kind of left the screen for a bit.
Yeah, sorry, it's my connection again. I just wanted to say that thank you for all those book recommendations. But so far, my favorite book has been by Trevor Noah. I was familiar with his sketches. I watch him quite often, him and the Mexican guy. But I didn't know that he wrote a book, and I was like, it was funnier than I expected. I knew that he's a funny guy, but the book made me laugh for like a good while. And I think it's one of the best books that I've read this year. So thank you so much, Doctor.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Shah?
Sorry, Doctor. I'm not in my best state, but I'm coping. It's fine. So yeah, based on today's class, I also took a lot of notes from you guys' pointers, like privileged background, tiger mom, media portrayal, minority problems, internalized racism, and parental figures and whatnot. So I'm gonna try my best to probe everything in my e-task and tweak a bit of what I have, and because I haven't started reading Bamboo Stalk yet, but I'm gonna do just that in this weekend. Yeah, so far so good. Doctor.
Just one more text to go, so hang on in there. I know it's been a difficult semester for a lot of you, so yeah, hang on in there.
But yeah, just one question. Is this our last class? Not yet, right, Doctor?
Next week is our last contact class, in the sense that we're going to do discussions like this. After that, week 12 and next week is 12. Week 13 and 14 would be consultations for your final project.
Okay, because I don't have any questions just yet, but I know I'm gonna have a lot in the coming weeks. Yeah.
Make consultation times. Anytime you've got certain things you want to discuss vis-a-vis your final project, just message me for a consultation slot, and we can schedule one easily.
Yeah, because I remember I think one of our first classes, I think we had like conversations about the final project, and then I just remember, I did mention Shanun Ahmad's writings and whatnot, so I'm gonna take a look on that as well. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Before I forget, Salim, are you thinking of doing Bamboo Stalk in the Arabic version?
Yeah, Doctor. In fact, I have read the Arabic version, in fact, but I'm waiting for the English version. I don't have the. Can somebody else just somebody send me on the website?
Salim, I think Dr. Rai has sent in our WhatsApp group the PDF. You can yeah.
I will check. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I'm so sorry, Doctor. But inshallah, I'll check it again.
Yeah.
Since I have got the Arabic version.
I did.
Sorry,
I
Doctor.
did send. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Sorry.
Okay. Cool. Ruby.
What I'm surprised is how there's a lot of overlapping, how this subject actually helps me in other subjects as well, and vice versa. Yes, because when you mentioned national canon, in Dr. Zalina's class, we study nation and narration. And yeah, there's a lot of overlapping. We study, the minority experiences, and then gender, and then oppression and whatnot. So I'm actually quite surprised to see how it all brings together to this field discipline of post-colonial literature. So I'm really glad, but it's only after 10 weeks and I see that, no wonder.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked it up, because I think when we were putting together the course and we were choosing the electives as well as the major papers that you all have to do, that's exactly the kind of way that we were curating it. We were hoping that if you see the big picture, you will see that, you know, the text that you read in one course shouldn't be read in isolation of the other courses. There is definitely overlapping, especially with both the theory course and comparative literature. Because in the theory course, it doesn't matter what text you use. What matters is the different theories that you are using as a reading approach for the reading of the particular text. In comparative literature, is the more you have read from many, many canons, the easier it is for you to make choices and to compare text, put it side by side and compare it. You know, so I'm glad you saw that connection. Okay, so another brilliant class, everybody. Round of applause to everybody for today's participation. So one more week to go. Hang on in there, you know, and please start to pace yourself with regards to your final project. Begin to at least have some ideas. You know, we heard Salim was thinking of the bamboo stalk, and Ruby has also said something about the mother figure, that she's looking into that for her final project. So if you all can start thinking about it now, and maybe even drafting some ideas and you know, talking to me about it, some of your thoughts, I think you will find the final project allowing you the space to have your say about whatever it is that you are interested in, rather than looking at it as a chore. God, another assignment I have to submit in 4 weeks' time or whatever. You will look at it as a way to say, you know what, I have something to say about this and I want to say it. You know, it could be about internalizing of racism. It could be about the issue of ignorance. It could be the issue of the stereotype due to single story. It could be the issue of a sense of belonging or the incompleteness of belonging. Or it could be about the privilege that some minorities experience or are given. Yeah, whatever your issue that you want to probe, use the final project as an opportunity to have your say. This is what I want to say about this issue, and I'm going to use these two novels or these two texts as a way to support my statements, right? So if you approach it from that perspective, it gives you the space. The assignment gives you the space to get things off your chest. You know, so if you approach it that way, it will be enjoyable, and the experience will give you an opportunity to kind of develop your own ideas intellectually. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for a good class.
Thank you, Doctor.
If anybody needs to
Doctor.
see me for anything, please make an appointment.
Inshallah.
Take care of yourself. And I'll see you next week. So please finish reading the bamboo stalk for our final class.
Inshallah.
Okay, cute. Bye bye.
Is that your sister?
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Doctor.
All of us are stuck together because of the pandemic. So yeah. So she's always
Aw.
having class or when I'm having work. Yeah. Because you know, it's like children are stuck at home.
She's starting her master's class rather early, but okay.
Yeah.
Basically very early. Okay, say bye, Amani.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Happy already.
Assalamualaikum.
Bye bye. Assalamualaikum.
Yeah.
Bye bye. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.